Morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Crew Car with myself, James Battey, and the wonderful Cherise Reedman. How are we doing?
Good morning. I've been up and about and focused and remembered everything. And I feel a bit smug talking to you.
Hang on, is this a bit of this feels like a jibe for my microphone, my headphone, everyone, general forgetfulness first thing on a Sunday. It's Sunday, I should be able to get away with that. If any day before I go to church, I just forget a few things. But yeah, there we go. Yeah. Cherise, I wanted to touch base with you because you obviously run the podcast Pearls of Wisdom on the sort of lady side, dealing with all things female within yachting, and then Balls of Wisdom, which you launched in order to give the sort of male perspective. But most importantly, you've sort of released the female safety survey, which, is very important in our industry, just to get an actual proper idea of what's happening. So, I mean, do you want to talk us through how you got to where you are? What was the driving force behind why you created Superyacht Laundry, Pearls of Wisdom, Balls of Wisdom, basically everything? And for those of people that don't know you, sort of, or affiliated to one of those, that you can kind of give them some kind of background, how you got here, and educate us.
Don't know about education. Yeah, I left the industry 10 years in October this year. Actually, it's going to be my anniversary, a full decade out, which is quite crazy. But I just found it really tricky leaving. You have to change so many parts of yourself. What defines us a lot of the time is what we do for a living. But obviously, when you leave the industry, you're changing so where you live, relationship statuses, like how they function. A lot of things go on all at the same time. That's before you get to house renovations and children and dogs and stuff. So I just found it really tricky. And I just wanted to know whether I was actually a lunatic. And am I the only one that was finding you, or is it actually really hard? And when I did a bit of research, it was just really hard to find anybody telling the story about, what happens next. Because women generally leave, the industry earlier than our male counterparts. It's a lot trickier to have a full life career in the yachting industry on board for women. They have to sacrifice other areas of their lives. So very tricky situation. And I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just me. So I set up Yacht Pearls of Wisdom. And that was in the hope to promote female voices and just their stories, like what they found hard, how they surmounted different problems and all sorts of things. So it was really just trying to connect. Also on board, a lot of the same mistakes were being made over and over again. And I was just like, well, that's because the women that have been there, done that and already made those mistakes weren't staying on board to tell the next generation to not do that. So, and that spreads into all kinds of different things.
Do you think part of it is? Do you think part of it is because, yachting is this kind of secretive? No one's allowed to talk about anything else, or is perceived as you're not allowed to talk about what goes on board. But actually, you're not allowed to talk about your guests, your owner, quite rightly so. I mean, you wouldn't dream of it, but you can talk about your day to day, like the hard bits about yachting, the great bits about it. And I think that's the problem. Everything's kind of got pushed into one bracket of like no talking, like no discussing anything. And yacht crew, we're very careful about what we say when actually, if you're struggling with certain aspects and it tends to be rife within the industry, the best thing you can do is actually talk about it, and other people go, well, actually, we had that same issue, but we dealt with it this way or that way. And you can share that information, which helps raise the industry as a whole, which, I feel has not been the case so much in yachting.
Obviously through Yacht Pearls of Wisdom, I'm exclusively really talking about how females are affected. And I think one of the things, like why I wanted to start it. So if you imagine, our male counterparts, you can get a mentor, so you're through deck. So it always, you get a mentor if you're junior stew, chief stew. But when you get to chief stew, there's no more mentoring. There's no more passing it back. There's no more, our captain can guide you in a way, but that actual role itself, your experienced people aren't there. It's not easy to reach out to experience. And by the nature of the job, it's fast paced and everything else. So one of the most common things that gets raised is, it's fly by the seat of your pants, kind of like get in there, get involved, get going kind of thing, especially with females. But there's no, like, I call it a matriarch, like in any other normal working environment on land, you'll get, people that have done the job for a long time. And especially like in a female environment, which is predominantly the interior, it's just not easy to access that experience and that knowledge. Even if you're open to talking about it, the actual experience isn't there. So, which I don't think it happens. So, the bridge is a kind of slightly different environment for like lower ranked, but less senior individuals. But also, I imagine, I mean, I haven't actually got the data in front of me. You spend longer as a second officer, first officer. It's a slower process because women are in industry a lot shorter. We get promoted faster, but you're promoted faster, but then the experience is lesser for the senior ranks, if you understand what I mean. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So I think it's a little bit.
You've got to try and get a career squeezed into a shorter time frame. Therefore, you may start as a junior stew, but you'll pick it up potentially, and then you don't necessarily have the qualifications. Like if you get into doing your yacht master, and then you do your yacht master, and then you start your officer of the watch modules, and then you're then it's like, okay, cool, we can now integrate you into this, and now you can do the chart updates, right? And this is how, if you're still on paper charts and not full this, the other. But yeah, you condensed your career. It's like you've got 10 years, get cracking, you've got to squeeze it all in then, and you got to make or break, basically, is what I interpret that you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a short amount of time. It's a higher pressure. I've discussed it many times. 70% of the guest experience is with the interior. So the pressure is real. Obviously, there's all pressure for all departments, but their pressure is real. If you've got an underperforming interior, that affects guests, that affects tips. There's a knock-on effect. But also, doing with technically, you don't need any professional training to work in the interior. There is no criteria for you to have anything. So it's a very different journey for interior to deck. And I think that to like the bridge journey, there's more opportunities for education or retraining or upskilling than there is in the interior. So it's a whole slightly different experience. So that's why, Yacht Pearls of Wisdom, that's why I wanted to fill that gap, to try and make it easier for interior, especially in the interior. But even, women that work on deck, it is slightly different experience for them as well. Just to give them some more support. It is all capable. You're capable of doing the job. You can do it. But to get that additional education and different additional support, you have to go looking for it. It's not expected or delivered on boats necessarily.
Do you not think as well, though? I mean, I spoke to, you may have seen it, Aurora Picard, who wrote the book for Superyacht Stews, basically, like the Bible. I mean, it's a fantastic book that she's put together. To share that knowledge and that information with her peers is epic. And I feel that yachting, maybe as a whole, in the deck side, it depends on under whose command you are, because some people don't like to share their knowledge because they feel like by sharing it, they're actually potentially giving away their role, that, the first officer will step up as the captain. And, there's that underlying fear of job security I see within some on the deck side of it. I can't talk about the interior side. Whereas actually it should be, we're here as captains, as senior crew members to share that knowledge, because by sharing that knowledge, we educate people and we create that level of trust with our peers, and then they look up to you and they're like, okay, cool, this is the way he did it. And you can actually learn yourself, because I'm by no means perfect and every day is a school day for me. But I think, it comes down to the kind of person who's leading, the leadership structure that sits within it. Because on some vessels, there's great leadership, and other vessels, obviously, there's toxic leadership, unfortunately, where it's all very kept to themselves. They don't want to share anything. People are therefore left to their own devices, left to go looking, as you say, for information rather than it being readily available. And I think that's certainly something that I'm trying to do with YWC, is kind of give people a baseline where it's like the information's here. It's up to you as to whether you use it, but it's here. Everything's under one roof, so to speak. So yeah, I mean,
I think leadership obviously is a massive thing. I think, the industry is catching up now that leadership is, it's just not a natural skill. You've got to be able to understand what you want out of your crew and then how to go about keeping, getting that motivation. Obviously, leadership qualifications, which I'm sure that, I'm aware that they're filtering into the professional qualifications when it comes to the deck side of things. Again, with which always happens in the interior, there is no criteria that we have to adhere to on the interior. So it is all self-motivation. If you want that chief stew role, you've got to show your own inclination. You've got to go look for the information to want to take it on. But then also, I know ladies that got promoted because there was nobody else. So you get, there's two sides. You've got a whole bunch of people that are hungry to climb the ladder and do it professionally and everything else. But then you get a whole bunch of people that kind of, there is nowhere else to go professionally. So you have to end up in the leadership role. And I've said this, we're talking about this, and hopefully we'll be talking about it when it comes around to like when we go to MITs and stuff like that. You get a whole bunch of people that are leaders that aren't naturally inclined to be leaders. So that's where it is essential, because there's a whole bunch of people that are in leadership roles where on land, it's very well documented. You get people pleasers and you kind of get doers. Do you know what I mean? Analytical, systems driven people, and then you get people that can motivate a whole team to get some stuff done. But in the industry, because the structure is the structure, you could end up with either or.
It's a valid point. It's leadership. It's not a given. And also, to be honest, even with training, some people just aren't leaders. They just aren't. And it's nothing against them, but some people just aren't put on this earth to lead. And that's fine. But it's when they end up in positions, and you see it, unfortunately, all too often in this industry. You may have a captain on board or a head of department who's just not a leader, and everyone beneath that person is like a revolving door. And it's like, that's not the issue. It's the person at the top that's the issue, because it all filters down. If people don't look to you for leadership, and if you're just going, no, just sort it out yourself, just crack on, look, you can work it out, you're paid to do that job, it's like they're left to their own devices. And rightly so. Mostly they're like, I've had enough, I'm out. So yeah.
I mean, I would say you go to things a little bit as well. It takes a really confident, self-assured person to go, you know what, I'm a really good second. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are some fundamentals that make up a team. And, I've got a really good friend of mine, and she was really, really true to herself. She was like, I am a fantastic second. She had tried to be a chief, but it just didn't fit her. But she had the self-awareness, to go, you know what, I'm just a really fab second. I can back somebody up. I can, strengthen them, real self-aware. But obviously the industry about ego, isn't it? And an ego will get you. You've been in the job long enough, you should be a chief engineer. Even if you are a, part of the job being a new chief engineer could be running a team of 6, and really you should just work on your own in the dark. But that's how the industry works.
But it's so true, and I've seen it a lot. Some fantastic people who can work as individuals, but when it comes to being able to, it's a bit like kind of only child, just not so good at sharing. And it's like, no, you need to operate in this space, and you need to be able to tell people and talk to people in a certain way that enhances the environment, rather than like, you should know this, you should be able to do that. Like, and it's just, it's poor management, unfortunately. But you just see it all too often. And as you say, to have the humility to say, I know where I am and what my strengths are. And to be able to say, I'm a really good second, but I'm not a chief. It's not my personality. it's not what I want. That takes real strength of character to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is possible to create an attitude change in the industry. If you look at what Callie Cooper's doing, so like she does the team, it's basically a team assessment. So you reflect on who you are as a person, what your attributes are, how you absorb information and direction. And then she brings the whole crew together. Go, right, the reason why he's really direct and only does this and he's not very friendly, when it comes to just giving it out instruction, then the whole crew then understands, well, that's his personality, that's why he does it that way, which makes it more acceptable, because you accept that they're not doing it just to wind everybody up, it's just the way that they are. I think there is this next generation of training, and like Callie's stuff, which, if you remember, Luxury Hospitality did the dynamic testing, you work out your personality type, just having that understand as a team of whose attributes, like where they work well and how to communicate with each other a lot better. But like the next generation of that kind of assessment is now with us. So if you're a captain, you've got flexibility in the budget and you want to create a fully functioning crew, what Callie's doing at Well Crew and some of the others, that's insane. That's like next gen. That's the kind of like working in, military teams and stuff. This is the kind of stuff they've been doing for years that we can bring on board. So, to try and create that cohesion. But also that's great information for a captain. Do you know what I mean? If you're having trouble in one department and you can't work out what the hell's going on, if you do an assessment, I get a company such as to do an assessment, work out what their personalities are, it will tell you within 5 minutes why there's friction, because it could just be two communication styles and just not gelling. But there's answers now. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, no, I've known Callie for many years now. And what she's doing is great. It's like when you can get that continuity in crew, there's nothing better. There literally, when things are working well and everyone, but you can't have. Sometimes you see it on some yachts. There's too much of the same personality because they assume that this is me and I need people like me around. And actually, there's nothing worse than having too much of the same. It's like you say, you can have too much of a good thing. You need the differences in personality because everyone brings their own individual bit to the table. And that's what actually makes it work. Whereas when you have lots of people, too many alphas being a prime example, there's nothing worse I've seen on boats where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of sort of scent marking going on around the boat. Everyone like, no, this is my department. This is like, I run this. And it's like, wow, kind of like cocks on tables in this kind of situation. It's a tricky one.
I mean, it's like,
but again, it comes down to training and everything else. But this is the problem. We always come to it. Training, whose responsibility is it? Is it the yacht? I mean, if you look at any other business in the world, if you want the most out of your business and to make people feel happy, because we all know environment is key. If you want a business to succeed, if you create an environment where people enjoy going to work so it doesn't feel like a job, then that business tends to thrive. Whereas when everyone's like, oh God, I've got another day at work, it's just their productivity and everything else that goes with it is diminishes because of the environment that you put them in. So, but in yachting, we have to, on a lot of vessels, the training's like, you need to do that in your time and you need to pay for it. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, I'm paying for training to make your experience better. Hang on, how does that like? And when you start trying to tie things together and explain to people, you need to do this. Okay, cool. But is that that's for the boat's benefit? Well, it's for your benefit as well, because then you'll be able to say that you've got that training. And it's like, okay, well, it's a sort of mishmash as to who should be paying for it, when it should be taken. And yeah, I think a real push for me is to try and get training and all that as integrated into that. It's not taken out of leave, that it's not paid for by the crew member. If it's the benefit of the yacht, it should be paid for by the yacht, much like any business, because the yacht is a business. As much as people like to see it as leisure, because it is a leisure activity, but we are paid to run that efficiently as a business and to make it work as a business. particularly on a commercial yacht, obviously.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it really has to come from the top, you know. Unfortunately, you know, that dream role of captain has a lot of responsibility, but it will be the pinnacle of trying to get change. You know, when a boat's going through budget assessments for that season, who is the only one that can get into the ear of family office owner to say, I need a crew development budget? Do you know what I mean? If we want to keep a great crew and it all working well and you don't have any headaches, we do need to have a part of the budget that invests in, you know. And I know that there are some owners that have paid for people to get tickets because they've developed a relationship and all of that kind of stuff. So it's just really expanding on some of the stuff that still already goes on, but in a more formal capacity. Like, really, there should be a minimum spend on crew development each year to maintain the high service that, as an owner, you want on board. And then if that budget is being spent and you still got a high service, well, then, you know, it needs to be looked at what the hell's going on.
so I
You
think,
know, it has to come.
yeah. Well, I think the word you just used, which I was talking with Kaylee previously, and this is the problem. I feel minimum is used too much in yachting. Everyone's like, it shouldn't be a minimum. It should just be a standard. This is standard training budget for this size vessel. Much like people have what is a standard yard period cost? You know, everyone kind of knows what kind of money, what's going to go on. You're going to have anti-foul done. You're going to have anodes done. You're going to, like, that's a cost that's almost like an accepted cost. There should be an accepted, budgeted cost that is just standard. It's not, this is the minimum that you need to do, because when we have that, there's always someone who'll be like, well, our minimum is less than your minimum. And it's like, no, it should just be a standard. And I think the more we can get that word standard into yachting, the safer and more enjoyable and the better people will attract. I feel that we're not maybe getting the right kind of personnel into, like, go back when I joined 21 years ago, that yachting was competing as an attractive way. You know, yachting was never a sort of 40-year career. It was get in 20 years, make as much money as you can. You sacrifice a huge amount from being away from family, friends, yada, yada, yada. But you could build up, you know, a portfolio of property or whatever investments, and then you get out. And that, I feel, was always people's long-term goals. Whereas now, unfortunately, the money stayed where it was. It hasn't gone up infinitely. And I feel that, you know, unfortunately, due to that, people feel like they're stuck, and it's not what it used to be. And it's not as attractive. And therefore, you know, why would you come into yachting when you can make good money back on land still and not sacrifice, you know, family life, relationships, weddings, marriages, funerals, etc. I think that's a big thing to try and get over.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you would know, but I would like to have a look at data. You know, like, obviously the salary of the crews changed, but have the fees from the crew agents changed? Have they gone up? You know, to find decent crew in the last 10 years, say for argument's sake, has the recruitment fees gone up? Because any inflation in their fees is obviously, you know, I'd love to know that. If it
Yeah,
costs
I
more
wouldn't
to
be able to
find
tell
good
you.
crew now, but then obviously the salary.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, recruitment agents, there are some fantastic ones out there, and they put a lot of time and energy into, you know, knowing the candidate, matching their needs and requirements, and knowing that environment. And I feel sorry for them, because a lot of recruitment, they just, sorry, a lot, some just fire out CVs as soon as they get it, have no real concept about the candidate, what they want, where they're going in their career, what kind of person they are. And then the recruitment agent that's put a lot of time into someone doesn't place that candidate because they've got onto the same boat that they were actually going to put them onto, but they're like, oh, we've received that from someone else. And I feel like that's a bit of a undercutting, and also its own problem in its own right. I hear too often about that, unfortunately, within recruitment. But yeah, there's a number of issues in yachting with recruitment. Everyone talks about longevity, But then, as you said, when it comes to training, there will always be someone that, gets trained by the yacht and then leaves. But then people go, well, we're not doing that again. They'll just leave again. And it's like, look, you've been burnt once, but that's the nature of the beast. That happens with anything. People's circumstances change. You can't judge everything based off one occasion. If it consistently happens, then you need to look at actually the environment you've created on board the yacht rather than trying to blame it on the fact that people have trained and then moved on. And juniors should move on. That's the whole idea. What you want is your heads of department to have the longevity because they know how the owner likes or, repeat charter guests like certain things. And the juniors get trained in one chief stew's way and then they move on to the next boat, they learn something else. And you kind of get to cherry pick all the bits of what you like to have certain people do certain things. And that creates you and how you then will lead. And the ideal leaders are the people that have taken the good bits from all the people in their careers. Like I've worked under some fantastic people. I started as a techie and I worked my way up. And you take the bits from the good leaders that you worked under and the way that they lead. And for me, one of the most important things is the ability to say, I've made a mistake. Because I readily am like, that was me. Sorry, guys. That was my mistake. Because when everyone looks at you as the captain and goes, well, he's just put his hand up and said he made that mistake, it then makes everyone else go, well, okay, cool. So mistakes are allowed. Because it's when people cover up and start going, oh, no, that wasn't me. I don't know who did that. That's when problems, for me, I believe, start to arrive. When, there's that kind of shame aspect to it. It shouldn't be. But we all do it. If you make the same mistake over and over again, that's a problem. But we're human. We make mistakes by the very nature of being human. So it's the ability of ownership.
I would go a bit further than that because obviously you were conducting the survey.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why we did it is obviously to get a bit more information about reporting. And obviously in general terms, when people you're talking about crew development, in general terms, when people are making mistakes, but they want to train and they want to get better and everything else. Why I wanted to do the survey is at the other end of that spectrum, things aren't being taken seriously or reported, or not being reported at the top, or being reported and not dealt with, are leading into some really dangerous situations, especially for female yacht crew. So yeah, I like the female yacht crew safety survey, which I decided to do, came out of that principle, but at the other end of the spectrum when it comes to actually serious incidences coming on board, because if a captain's not developing people seriously, dealing with issues properly, it spreads to everything. So from the most minor to the most serious, the attitude from the top really is possibly it's the most important of the vessel. And like you said, but yeah, with the survey, the female yacht crew safety survey was an idea that I wanted to do because, well, you were there last November, Mets, in the light of a murder on board. There was, crew welfare was talked about, but not in a very serious way, and definitely not isolated to females. So I just was like, well, I feel like we need to do something to at least have a look at how things, what is actually going on. Because of Paige Bell, is Paige Bell an anomaly? That murder was just a freak accident that, or is there a systemic problem that perhaps needs to be dealt with? So just decided enough was enough. And I know that there's obviously tons of charitable organizations and reporting and everything else, and they're all doing great work, but they won't separate the sexes. They like to look at the industry as a whole, so men and women alike. So obviously, yes, all things can happen to men as well. But I was just like, can we just, I would really like everybody to be so self-assured that we can focus on each sex, because the journey for each sex is slightly different in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And how many are you at now? How many people have done this?
We're at 900 now. 900 women 1,600 incidences that they've told us about. I've got 150 stories / comments about the industry. The survey itself, completely anonymous, just really wanting to get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And why I use the good, the bad, and the ugly is there are good boats out there do handle really horrible situations well. And I've got a couple of examples of that. One boat specifically, I think it needs to be investigated why or how that boat dealt with that situation. You know, this is a drink spiking and a rape case, and that victim really did come back. She went back and worked on the boat. She felt so safe and so cared for. That individual, the boat still stayed the safe space. So that needs to be investigated. That needs to be looked at. We need to talk to the captain. What did he do? How did he do it? Did he, one of these things? But unfortunately, in the noise of the industry, you don't generally hear the good stories, and obviously because we are restricted with NDAs like that, nobody really wants to talk about them either, which I hope in the future, organizations like Chirp and stuff like that will get more information about certain things. So the survey itself, completely anonymous, so completely safe for women to explain what's happened to them, just to try and get a clearer picture. And it's really just cold hard facts. It's not about necessarily how they felt about things. It's what actually happened. So who did you report it to? Did you report it? Did you leave the boat? Were you fired and told to leave the boat? Covering incidences like assault, bullying, sexual assault, drink spiking. So a lot of different things, just to try and get a clearer picture of what's going on. The data that's come through so far is really interesting. So obviously we'll do a full report, but it's basically 50-50 whether people report, and then it's 50-50 pretty much whether anything's going to happen. So 25% of things are even dealt with in a... I think, one of the reasons I did the survey, it's going to be cold, hard facts, but one of the things that's kind of touched me the most is at the end of the survey, we've got a space so you can make additional comments. So like, what do you feel that the industry needs to change? Just basically anything. You can stick anything in there. And there's been a lot of ladies that have actually just said what actually happened, the brutal truth. And, when we do produce a report, we will talk about these things that are happening. I think it's one of those things that, it's not because of NDAs and stuff like that, it's literally Chinese whispers within the industry. We all know of stories and horrendous stories, and, it's all third hand, fourth hand. And the reason why, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's sorry, Karen. I mean, one of the things, like, with obviously just the initial results coming through, with the people that reported it, they're reporting it. So there's like, one of our industry is probably quite unique, because you could be reporting, sometimes you're reporting to the, somebody who's closely connected to the perpetrator. You don't know people's situations. One of the things that what I think is going to come out just initially is there's a moral corruption in it, if you can understand my meaning. So with the survey itself, what's coming through is, we've got to always remember that there are lots of different factors at play. So, you could have, like what I've said to you before about captains and the pressures of captains, and, you've got a house and a mortgage and kids at private school or whatever, a lot of pressure, as well as a volatile owner. And then you've got a whole load of disruption underneath you. Now, I'm not saying that, if something was terribly wrong, but I do think people gloss over stuff because they just want to keep their job. That's one of the things that's coming through, that they're just wanting to keep the status quo because everybody wants to still keep their job. They don't want it to report it or have it, or if it's reported, have it elevated and not deal with it. So it's going to be really interesting to see the results, what comes.
What number are you kind of publishing at? What you kind of, when do you say, like, okay, that's solid enough data, like 1,000 people, 1,200, 1,500, 2,000? I know there'll be different stages. Like, this is the data collection of 1,000 people and then 2,000, 3,000, whatever. When does when do you kind of start to publish, so to speak?
We want to get to 2,000, so we're close to the halfway mark now. I think it would be really to get a clearer picture. And like I said, one of the things that I didn't want the survey to come across as that it's just like a version of Yachty's name, fame, and shame. There is no boat names, there's no times, there's no locations, there's no names. This is just experience. Has something happened to you, or has it not? Is your whole experience, like we've had ladies write in saying, I had a great time, there was no issues on the boats that I were on. Brilliant. Love that. But they're the ones that should be constantly learned from, rather than hearing these horrible stories. And also, like you said, when we're talking about leadership and training and all of that stuff, you get toxic at the top, it filters all the way down. And one of the things our industry has that some others don't is the fact that you could have the most horrifically toxic boat, and when it comes to sexual violence against women, a whole season. So for like this summer season, you can have 5 girls that end up having an absolutely horrendous experience on board, but the culprit ends up staying on board for the winter, and the next season it just repeats all over again. So brand new 5 women. So the perpetrators of some of the most horrible things can just, every year they get fresh opportunities, and that's what I want to stop.
I think but this is it, and I think you get it as well with yachts. I know yachts that potentially the ownership and the way that it's run, they don't care about the fact that it's a revolving door, because the owner knows that he's difficult or whatever, or what his demands are, and he doesn't care, so he just keeps on churning through crew, and it's an incredibly toxic environment for someone to work in. But certain people stay in their positions and are just, as you say, status quo, accepting like it's just the way it is. And it's like, it shouldn't be. It should be highlighted. It should be like, this vessel, unfortunately, has this and this, so that you're aware. That's fine. If you are saying to yourself, I'm aware of everything and I'm going into this environment knowing all of these failings, then that's a choice. But you shouldn't be walked into something having no idea about that, because no job on this planet do you get that. It doesn't exist. Whereas in yachting, the grey area is rife, unfortunately, and you suddenly find yourself in there. You're on a boat, that cruises constantly, and you're under the cosh, and there's no out for you. And like you say, you've got bills to pay, but no one's told you about this environment, because maybe you don't have as many people, you've not been in the industry that long, you don't have that network, and you're keen to get a job, and suddenly you've been offered an opportunity and you're like, oh my God, I've got a job. And you go and work on that vessel, and you get on there, and that's your first experience, and probably your last experience, because you hear of it all too often. People get on the wrong boat to start with, and they are great. I've met some wonderful young ladies, young lads who've come into yachting, and they've been burnt on their first vessel, and sure enough, they're like, this is shit, I'm out. And you're like, I can't believe it. He was such a good crew member. She was such a good stew, whatever it was, because we get it quite a lot. We, being a charter boat, we get day workers in between on turnarounds. And you're like, okay, cool. This girl was great. Ruth will say to me, oh, it has fantastic day workers. She was wicked. And then she gets a job, and it's like, she's not available next time we come in and we need a quick turnaround. It's like, nice one. So happy you got work. And she's like, actually, I'm now back in the UK, had an absolute nightmare, I've left. And it's like, what? But you were great. And unfortunately, you hear about it more often than you should. And it's about, if we can stop that, then I think we have a chance of elevating everything. But it's accountability. It has to be transparency and accountability across the industry, or nothing gets better. If only crew are making sure that they're transparent, but management companies aren't, brokers aren't, contractors aren't, all of these services that feed the ecosystem that is yachting, if everyone doesn't get on board and go, look, we want to weed out the bad, because that's all it is. it's like anything in life. You just want to highlight and just go, look, that's not acceptable. Okay. You guys have to look, like, we're not saying, we're not outing you, but it's been highlighted that what you're doing here isn't great. So we're letting you know about that. Please change. And, here is some pointers as to how you can change. And, everyone needs that, that advice, those pointers to be able to say, okay, well, this is, the feedback is so important in any business that's going to evolve. Do you get feedback? There is a channel where you get information back from people. Is what we get from charter guests through brokers, through our guest book. At the end of a charter, it's the best thing for us to go, can you just sign our guest book? It'd be great. And like reading our guest book, like genuinely makes me so happy and proud of the team that I have, because you're like, we have created this experience. And we all know, you look at your kids, you ask them what they got for Christmas, they can't tell you, but you ask them about a holiday that you went to, maybe Egypt even, and they will be like, yeah, it was amazing. We went to Egypt and we only saw 30 drones and one missile go over. Anything like anything like this. But these are experiences, and these are the things that stay with you for life. Not, oh yeah, I got that bit of Lego for Christmas, I think. I can't remember. Like, stuff is stuff, but memories come from experiences. And that's our job in yachting, to create lifelong memories for these guests who, on the whole, have loads and loads of money behind them and have access to all these various experiences, but some aren't good because unfortunately they're not managed and dealt with, and the leadership's not right within them. We've all done it. We've all been to an amazing restaurant in terms of it's described as being amazing, and you go there and the food will be amazing, but the service is wrong. And you're like, this was far from amazing. Whereas you can go to a restaurant that has good food, but amazing service, and you rave about it. It's just about fine tuning, I feel, in yachting.
I think we're on the verge. I think there is the way things are everything's being looked at at the moment. I do think, professionalization, that's probably the best way to describe it. It's coming for the industry. It's, it's probably a long time coming. I think there's now a realistic look at what is being expected and the training that's been provided. As you said, minimum. I think, operational manning and minimum manning, or emergency manning there should be a clear distinction between the two. It was created, and in a different time as well. We are in it's in a different time. But the main thing that I want to do in all of this professional change, there's got to be a way to filter out people that just don't deserve to be in the industry. Like, enough is enough kind of thing. And like I said to you before, the results that are coming through, that we will publish, every single season, there are individuals that are working within our industry that just traumatize brand new women every season. You're just literally shipping in a whole bunch of women traumatized. That's got to stop.
I had the unfortunate circumstance of hearing one story from someone one night and then meeting the individual who had created this atrocity to this individual the following day. And, I had to genuinely hold myself back mentally from like wanting to throttle this person. But again, it's one of those, I've only got one side of a story. It's very like, you find yourself, but this person who mentioned what happened, I know them and I trust them, and they're not someone to make it up. But it's unbelievably shocking that these things go on, and these people just, they continue on completely untouched, and that needs to change. There needs to be accountability. Like, you did this and your career's done. Like, you wouldn't get away with it in any other job. And I don't know why they think they can get away with it in yachting, because, like I say, it's I've always said for 21 years, the Foreign Legion, like, this was people running away from things and like hiding under, oh, well, this didn't really happen. That was that. She did this. He did that. And it's like, no, your behavior is completely unacceptable and actually illegal. So yeah, it's really, yeah. Well,
there's change. afoot.
Yeah, I think so. I just hope that with the change. Okay, so come to my magic question. You got a magic wand. You're allowed to change one thing and one thing only. What is it before my phone shits the bed again?
It would be captains, if I'm honest.
You
I would
change
make
captain.
sure that
What would you do?
no, I would, captains need more support. They really need to realize that, they need to understand that they don't need to fix everything, although the buck really does technically stop with them. But they need to use all of the tools at their disposal. They need to use the boat insurance properly to support their crew. They need to use Meta properly to support their crew. But they also need to understand, and I think this is something that's going to come on the horizon, is if there's accountability coming, unfortunately, first it's going to come to the captains first. So it's really going to change your time. And I don't mean it. There are tons of captains out there that don't need to worry about anything. They really don't, because they're professional. They do their job. They're always looking to grow and understand and learn and everything else. Those guys are going to be fine. But there will be a whole bunch of other captains that, when accountability comes, it will be probably not a comfortable experience for them. It's only because everything comes from the bottom. So if I'm telling women to actually report stuff, but they're reporting it to a captain that's not interested, no accountability is going to stop him from doing stuff. It's a pointless exercise. And that's one of the things I think the survey will show, that even when it's reported, the chance of it being dealt with properly is pretty minimal. So if I had a magic wand, there would be definitely better training for captains when it comes to man management, and especially when it comes to female incidences. And then also understanding that the reason why you need to do that is because accountability is coming. You can't just look the other way when stuff's going on board your boat anymore.
Yeah, I think this is it. I think for me, I'm gonna push it again. My magic wand moment is I would like to move in the realms of airline crew, where crew rotate as a crew. I think that creates that continuity. I think is quite disruptive for juniors to learn how someone likes something done, and then 6 weeks later it changes. Then maybe 3 weeks later the chef leaves. Then it's constantly changing, and it's in a very tough environment. Whereas if you came as one crew, the owner, the charterers get the best experience, because that crew coming in are pumped to be coming back to work, and the crew going out are like, okay, cool, we're going on our leave. I think it's not like we can't afford it as an industry. I know people will kick and scream about it, but I think from my perspective, I'd love to see it evolve in that way, because people would be so happy to be going to work. You're like, okay, cool. And then that would make it a lot easier to integrate training and saying, as part of your leave, you are going to be doing training for a week as a unit. We've got a leadership course that you guys are going on, all this kind of stuff. It just becomes a lot more palatable for people to go, okay, cool. Well, I get 6 months leave a year, and there will be 6 weeks within that 6 months leave where I'm doing training and I'm going on leadership, and I'm working as a team and learning the intricacies of that team and fine-tuning that team, and everyone wins in that. For me, crew are happy because they've got rotation. Crew are happy because they're not having to learn how different people like things. It's difficult as a junior when I was coming up through the ranks, and you always had one captain that you preferred to the other. And then, you'd have a chef on rotation, a first officer on rotation, a chief steward on rotation, all these different changing factors that you as a junior have to adapt to. And yeah, I just think it's better environment for people. You see it with airline crew, and it helps with rest. It helps with everything else. People come in with a lot more positive outlook. So I'm going to keep saying it until it happens. So
interesting idea.
Yeah, well, I just think for me, I really believe in it. Like, my stepdad was a commercial pilot. Airline crews, they join as a crew. And I think that's it. When you've got your crew and you turn up, you know how everyone works, you know people's foibles, you know where people need to work on. And it's a lot easier to when you go in, rather than kind of constant changing, evolving environments. When it's such high pressure and such close quarters, it's very tricky. So yeah, But yeah, accountability,
That's me.
that's the dream, but we'll see. But as always, such a pleasure talking with you, especially on the Sabbath. I know, obviously, normally both of us are in church preaching to the mass.
Preaching to the masses. Yeah, that's
Well,
me.
exactly.
That's me.
But yeah, enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your Sunday to chat with me. It's been great.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.